You, Julie. Hello, everyone, and happy Shushan Purim. Shushan Purim is the day after Purim, as the book of Esther describes. The people of Shushan actually fought their enemies for 2 days, and then they celebrated on the 15th of Adar, which is today, rather than the 14th of Adar. So when I was growing up, we used to have lots of Purim carnivals at school on the 15th of Adar today, rather than on the 14th of Adar when we were with our families. So happy Shushan Purim, post Purim. We are going to talk about Parashat Tzav. And as Julie said, yes, it's Purim in Jerusalem today also, a walled city. We're actually going to talk today about really together Parashat Vayikra and Parashat Tzav, the first Torah portion in Vayikra and the second. I want to say at the outset that actually Parashat Tzav is my bat mitzvah parsha. I did not read, I did not lean it, I did not chant it. I grew up in an Orthodox community, but my father did chant it, and many of you on this call know that my father passed away 7 months ago, and I'm dedicating a lot of learning to him this year, and so I'll dedicate our learning to him today, since we're going to talk about prayer, and my father was very, very dedicated to praying every day. And I wanted to share one more thing about the Torah portion, Vayikra and Tzav. Oh, just that also, not only did my father chant Tzav, it was also his bar mitzvah portion. So he and I share a bar and bar mitzvah portion, which is very nice. So many of you who have studied with me before know that my second screen is kind of behind me. So I'm going to look up. I'm going to look directly at you as much as I can, and then look up at my screen. And I'll share my screen with you as much intermittently, and we'll pause a few times for reflections and questions. And I'll also ask for readers throughout our time together today. So I think that's all by way of introduction. Oh, no, not quite. One more thing. I do not pay that much attention to the chat. I just can't. I see that there are some beautiful, I only see the preview that there's some very beautiful comments coming in, but I'm not really able to see the chat and focus on you and our learning together. So you are always welcome to email me, and I try and get back to you in a timely manner. It's abby@explorejewish.com, and I usually mean to put it in the source sheet. I don't think I did that today. So just please keep in mind that if you want me to see something that you're sharing and you don't get to share it aloud, feel free to shoot an email over. Okay, so I'm going to begin by sharing the screen. And I have many screens here, so it's just going to take me a second to find the right screen. A little strange. Bear with me for one more second here. Okay, I think I'm sharing my screen right now. Okay, yes, I think that was successful. Okay, I'm just adjusting so I can see you and my screen at the same time. Okay, so sacrifices, I don't know how many, actually, can I see by way of thumbs up, have people here studied sacrifices before? Have you explored sacrifices in, mostly based in Parashat Tzav, our Torah portion today, or I know last week you focused a little bit on incense. So by way of thumbs up, can I see, have people studied, have people dove into sacrifices before? Thumbs up if you have, thumbs down if you haven't so much. Okay, great, a mix. Thank you. So sacrifices are exceedingly difficult to understand, I think, and there's a lot written about them. I made my way through some of the material. So I want to start with an overview of the kinds of sacrifices that are discussed at the beginning of Leviticus. There are also in Exodus and Numbers daily and holiday sacrifices described. The ones here in Leviticus, chapters 1 through 7, are essentially special occasion sacrifices. And some of them the priests brought, and some of them people brought. So you can see there's an overview here. We're not necessarily going to dive into each kind, but there are these different occasions where people brought sacrifices, gratitude, celebrations. Sometimes the priests ate the sacrifices. Sometimes the priests and the offerer ate them. Some of the sacrifices were brought to secure forgiveness. You know, I did something that I am not proud of, or that is considered a sin. It was against the Torah law, and so I'm going to bring a sacrifice in order to make amends for that. And by the way, I'll just share. I can't resist sharing right now. I heard a sermon last week by Rabbi David Ingber about where he incorporated both the idea of sacrifices as expressing regret, and also Daniel Pink's new book about the importance of regret and not necessarily dismissing our own regret in order to move on in positive ways, sort of embracing regret so that we can turn that positively into action moving forward. So I'm adding that to our food for thought today. No pun intended, food for thought. Leviticus
Abby?
sacrifices. Yes, Julie.
Sorry to interrupt. Is there a way you can make the
bigger
screen larger, because it's in a small, it's sort of in a
How's
small
that?
box there? Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. If it's too small again, let me know. Thank you. So I'll share one thing that I found particularly interesting is that the mincha offering, or mincha offering, is an offering. Now we think of mincha as the afternoon service, but it was actually, it was an offering that, this is supposed to say superior being. Some scholars believe that section to chapter 2, 1 through 16, it was sort of added in the midst of all these sacrifices in order to say, wait, we also want to make sure that if someone is not a person of means, they also have the opportunity to bring a sacrifice to the temple. So it was a grain offering or a fruit offering rather than an animal, which if you had an animal, you were probably wealthy. So different sacrifices. I'm gonna pause here just for a moment so that you have the lay of the land here. And I want to emphasize again, chapters 1 through 7 include both Vayikra and Tzav. And what we're not doing today are chapters 8 and 9, which are also part of Tzav, or just chapter 8, excuse me, which is begins to talk about more a focus on Aaron and the priesthood and getting ready to become the official priests of the sanctuary. So let me pause here and check in. Is there anything that anyone wants to clarify or reflection that people have just on the lay of the land here, the different kinds of occasional sacrifices brought? And I'll take 1, 2, or 3 reflections or questions. So up to 3, and then we'll shift gears a little bit.
Tanya?
Something very interesting that I learned when I was studying about the sacrifices. I had a very strict teacher, and she wouldn't let us call it sacrifice. We had to use the word korban or korbanot, which is to draw near. And you know, the pagan people at that time, they would use the sacrifices to try to manipulate their gods or to keep their gods away from them, or to get something from their gods. But the difference between the Jewish worldview was that the Israelites used their sacrifices or their korban to come close to God.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Tanya. You said a lot. I want to make sure we kind of bring everything into our awareness here. The Hebrew word for sacrifice is korban. and the root is kuf resh bet, which does mean to bring close. So I really appreciate Tanya bringing in that point. I meant to say that too at the beginning, Tanya, that the idea of a korban is about getting closer to God, to the divine, to the spiritual. And that is important to keep in mind. Sacrifice became the English translation, but it's not an offering or an act of bringing close. An act of bringing near is more precise. It is more accurate. The idea of juxtaposing pagan offerings in the ancient Near East versus Israelite offerings is a little bit tricky. I do think there are distinctions, but for example, I even included in here something from the Eitz Chaim Chumash, the conservative movement. I think it's considered the conservative movement's Chumash, the Bible that's used in many conservative synagogues, which is excellent. A comment that sometimes the burnt offerings used with other offerings was used in order to secure a favorable outcome. So I don't think I think there is a little bit more of a gray area there, like a little bit more of a nuance, where I don't think Israelite theology was as divorced from surrounding cultural theologies as sometimes we've made that out to be in the past, in the past. So I just want to put that out there. Again, it's food for thought. I think there is some overlap. So Tanya, again, thank you for bringing all that in. And I'll just take one more comment or reflection now so we can keep moving into multiple kinds of ideas here. So one more for the moment.
Maya and Dennis, we can get to you maybe the second round of questions.
Thank you. I guess I don't fully understand today, like what our equivalency is for sacrifices. And I was wondering if we were going to cover that at all today, because it doesn't seem like even in my mind when I'm trying to project myself backwards in time, and if I'm leaving room for like all bulls not to be like 1,000 pounds in the past, right? Like maybe like juiced them or something. Like what is it that we're supposed to be doing that's equivalent? Because you mentioned the grain offering for people who might be like of lower income or whatever, but I don't even see how, like, if you're not supposed to use like leaven in a sacrifice, like how the challah burning, like, would it be at all related to these sacrifices? Like, I just don't understand like what an equivalency is in the post Second Temple period.
Yeah, so Bimaya, you're walking us right into the next part of our time together, because we are going to talk about the whole this whole exploration together is really based on the connection or potential connections between sacrifice and prayer. So thank you for helping us get there. And some aspects you mentioned is two very specific aspects of sacrifices. One is this prohibition against leaven, not only on Passover, but leaven was generally not allowed in the sacrifices in general. And I'll say something that I learned that is completely fascinating to me. It's probably one of the first things I read about leaven that made any sense to me, is that leaven sped up the process, it slowed down the process of baking and of the sacrificial process. And it seems like the system here and the priests wanted the person bringing the sacrifice and the process of the actual sacrifice and the priest's role themselves. And then if they were eating together, that follow-up to the actual bringing of the sacrifice. And sometimes sprinkling blood was part of this. That process, they wanted to keep all those steps together. And I don't know if it was like the impression that I got from what I read was not to speed things up, but more to keep the ritual actions all together. And if the sacrifices had leaven that were part of them, that would slow down the process. So as I'm sharing this with you, I'm not like 100% sure how that would work technically, like if it makes the bread rise, but then how exactly does that slow things down? But I am putting that out there. It is something I encountered that I thought really made sense theologically, this idea of each step of the sacrificial process following in a kind of like a moderate speed. Moderate's not the word I'm looking for, but like step by step. There wasn't a delay in the process in the sacrificial system and process. So I'm just going to put that out there. Maybe we'll come back to it, or I can address it some other time some more. Okay, so with Bimaya, you mentioned leaven and the bread. Okay, so I hit on the bread a little bit. So let's dive into now, and we're going to shift on. I'm going to scroll down here. Okay, I'm actually going to come back to. We're going to skip a little bit. I'm going to scroll all the way down to page 7, part 2 of the Babylonian Talmud text that I included. So for those of you that are looking on your own, page 7, part 2 of the Babylonian Talmud text. And I actually want to start up here, just taking a look, that this section is from Brachot, the section on blessings in the Babylonian Talmud. And I want to say a word for anyone who might be here for the first time, who wants a reminder of what the Babylonian Talmud is. The Babylonian Talmud is a massive collection of legal discussion and law and legend, edited in approximately the year 550 CE in Sasanian Persia, in the Sasanian Persian Empire. We call it the Babylonian Talmud when the Jews, because when the Jews were exiled to Babylonia in 586 BC, they became Babylonian Jews, and that we still use that to refer to the Talmud that they created 750 years later, but really they were operating in the Persian Empire, which is interesting to think about, especially today. So, and the Talmud is it's divided up into multiple sections, multiple categories of Jewish law and Jewish life, and blessings is one of them. The first part of the Talmud is called the Mishnah, edited in about 200 CE. That's only legal discussion, very little story. And then the Babylonian Talmud, which we often use as synonymous with the second part of the Talmud, was compiled, let's say, between 300 and 550 CE. Some people date it a little bit later, but the rabbis that are quoted are from those two centuries, 300 to 400, 400 to 500 approximately. And the Mishnah was edited in the land of Israel. Just interesting to keep in mind the geography here. And there are a few things that we're going to see. You may be used to this already, but the text that I quoted here, the bolded part reflects the precise Hebrew or the precise Aramaic, the lingua franca of the Jews at the time, an Aramaic Hebrew dialect. And also the term Gemara is going to be used, and that means the second part of the Talmud, the sort of what people like to call the commentary on the Mishnah. And I'm going to share with you, don't pay too much attention to what each of the rabbis is saying. Just know, I want us to pay attention to the content here and the connection between prayer and sacrifice. And we're going to skip the first part, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, and jump to the second part, because the second part really connects prayer and sacrifice. And we'll come back. I think we will come back to the first part. So can I have a reader for this Gemara, this section in Brachot? And one more thing here, the word Breita is used, and that means an earlier source, a Tanaitic source, a source from the time of the Mishnah, the first part of the Talmud. So can I have a reader for part 2 here, which is a few paragraphs?
Go ahead, Robert.
Part 2, and it was taught in a Baraita in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that the laws of prayer are based on the laws of the daily offerings. Why did the rabbis say that the morning prayer may be recited until noon? Because although the daily morning offering is typically brought early in the morning, it may be sacrificed until noon. And Rabbi Yehuda says, my opinion, that the morning prayer may be recited until 4 hours into the day is because the daily morning offering is sacrificed until 4 hours. 5. And why did the rabbi say that the afternoon prayer may be recited until the evening? Because the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed until the evening. Rabbi Yehuda says that the afternoon prayer may be recited only until the midpoint of the afternoon because, according to his opinion, the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed until the midpoint of the afternoon. And why do they say that the evening prayer is not fixed? Because the burning of the limbs and fats of the offerings that were not consumed by the fire on the altar until the evening, they remained on the altar.
Okay, read a little. Keep going.
And were offered continuously, through the entire night.
And a little bit more.
A different reader, right?
No, keep going.
And why did the rabbi say that the additional prayer may be recited all day? Because the additional offering is brought throughout the entire day. However, Rabbi Yehuda says that the additional prayer may be recited until the 7th hour of the day, because the additional offering is sacrificed until the 7th hour.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. What's happening here, and I'm going to give some more background in a moment, but what's happening in this text, in the massive Gemara, this one snippet that we're getting, is the ancient rabbis are saying, how do we know that we pray 3 times a day? The ancient rabbis, they already prayed 3 times a day. They're reflecting on what's the source, and they do this all the time. What's the source? How do we know? And they say, well, you know what? We know because there were daily sacrifices that were offered 3 times a day. And then they get into detail about how long in the morning can we say the morning prayer? How long through the afternoon can we say the afternoon prayer? The detail is not as significant for our purpose, is what the rabbis are doing. This is a key text in thinking about is there a connection? The rabbis make a connection to us between sacrifice and prayer. They say, all those sacrifices in the Bible, yeah, we know about them. The daily offerings, the holiday offerings, all the sacrifices that I showed you earlier for special occasions. What do we do every day to remember what the people did or we pray every single day? Not only are we praying because we want to pray to God for help, we want to acknowledge God, we want to bless God, we're cultivating a relationship with God while we pray. That model is based on the whole sacrificial system of daily prayers. And what I want to put out there also is that it's not that the rabbi said, when we think back to the beginning where we are in our annual Torah reading cycle, the beginning of Vayikra, that there are all these special offerings. The rabbis didn't create a system where people would bring, or they would write a prayer for a special occasion. Like now, sometimes we think about, sometimes when people go to Israel, to Jerusalem, they put a note in the Kotel, in the Hebrew, in the Western Wall, asking for something special. Or, it's not like if we do something wrong, the rabbis are saying, yeah, when we do something wrong, we need to write a letter or we need to acknowledge what we did. And, they do, there's the whole repentance process also. But what they're saying here is on a daily basis, we remember the sacrifices and we do that by praying. It's also interesting to think about that, what was I going to say? That, oh gosh, it was on the tip of my tongue. I was so eager to tell you. Give me 1 second, and then I'll pause for questions, and then I'll remember it'll come back to me. Something else related to the rabbi's choice. Oh, yes, I do know. Something interesting to think about is the sacrificial system was separate from prayer in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, we have the whole book of Psalms. The Israelites also spontaneously break into prayer after crossing the Red Sea. There are many occasions for prayer. Moses says, I taught this at my Jewish learning once, Moses says on behalf of his sister Miriam, who gets sick after she speaks poorly of him, Moses says to God, El na rafa na la, please pray, heal her, God. But prayer, the sacrifices, they were happening silently. What the rabbis do is they say, no, this thing that happened every single day, as Vimaya said earlier, to come close to God, to connect to God, or no, Tanya, you said that. This thing that happens every single day, we now do that, but we are combining prayer with sacrifice in order to get close to God. And I'll say one more piece here, which is that the first part, which I wanted to do second, the first part of this section in Tractate Brachot, in section Brachot, is about not only did some rabbis think that prayer was connected with sacrifice and modeled after sacrifice, but some rabbis actually say, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive, that our forefathers developed the idea of prayer, and they are they decided on the fixed times for prayer every single day. And they did that based on certain hints in the verses that we actually won't go through right now. But the rabbis really raise the bar for prayer, and they model, again, they're modeling the fixed daily prayers on the sacrificial system. So when we think about, I'm encouraging us to think about today, when we think about this sacrificial system that does, I think for many of us, feel so foreign and ancient and, maybe had its roots in pagan religion, as essentially Maimonides hints at and criticizes, which maybe we'll still have time to talk a little bit about, but if not, there's a criticism of the sacrificial system by Maimonides that's in your handout here. So I lost my train of thought, but the bottom line is the rabbis not only raised the bar for prayer and made prayer part of their daily operating system, they connected that attempt at closeness to God, closeness with God, asking for multiple things, expressing gratitude, expressing things that when we do things wrong. All those are elements that are now part of our daily prayer system. So again, what I wanted to say was when we think about what is the relevance, when we look at this very seemingly antiquated sacrificial system, the rabbis had that trouble also. And they said, no, it's not antiquated. We're just reinventing it post-temple. When we pray, we're praying at the same exact times that our ancestors did. And our prayers reflect the kinds of sacrifices that our ancestors brought. They reflect gratitude. They reflect acknowledging God. They reflect asking for forgiveness. And we fold those into the daily prayer offerings. They're not just regular daily prayer offerings, because that's what we offer to God. They have a purpose. And we're going to shift in a couple minutes after some comments and questions. We're going to shift to thinking together about, what do those elements look like in some of our daily prayers? So let me pause there. That was a lot of information. So I'm going to pause here for 1, 2, or 3, depending on our timing, reflections or questions on the rabbis and their connection, making the connection between prayer and sacrifice.
So first we'll give Dennis an opportunity. Dennis, did you still have your question or comment from earlier?
My question was, how does one know the authenticity of the initiative of sacrifice and prayer?
What does that mean, the authenticity? Help me understand a little bit
so
more.
that it doesn't become simply asking God for a favor, that he's not our celestial butler, or that it becomes magic.
Mm-hmm.
If we truly want to draw near.
Yeah. I mean, that you're asking both in the context of sacrifices and prayer?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I mean, it's extremely
Yes, that's
difficult.
why I asked it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think we can necessarily, it seems like, right? Let's think about the intention of the authors here and the texts. Obviously, they want us to be genuine and authentic in connecting with God, bringing sacrifices, but they don't necessarily address, well, how do we cultivate the mindset of being authentic and genuine in our spiritual lives? They don't necessarily address that in the sacrificial system. I will say it's very interesting that in the whole book of Psalms it's incredibly moving and powerful. All these Psalms showing the way a person has these like deeply heartfelt, deferential experiences to God and a higher power, asking for help in multiple ways. So it seems like the part of the Bible that really addresses this cultivation of a heartfelt, humble affect is really the book of Psalms. But I think that it could be more broad than that, but I'll say that for now. And also in Judaism, we like to talk about the distinction between keva and kavanah. And there's even I think it's in Pirkei Avot in the Ethics of the Fathers. There's a Mishnah section that says, a person shouldn't only make her prayers fixed. Like obviously Judaism asks us, I think it's fair to say Judaism asks us, or depending on your perspective, Judaism demands of us that we pray 3 times a day. But the rabbis acknowledge that it's easy to lose a genuine connection or a heartfelt connection. And that's what they're addressing in that Mishnah. So
that Mishnah is interesting because perhaps what is being suggested is the process of ritual ensures the purity of the motive or intention or kavanah.
Yeah, possible. I mean, it's a challenging issue. So thank you for bringing that into the mix today. So let's take 1 or 2 more.
All right, Susan and Doug, go ahead.
I'm trying to clarify some of your phraseology, but the question is, in terms of our kavanah, do the rabbis feel we need to be aware of the connection of prayer and sacrifice, or can we just?
Yeah, they expect us to be aware of it. Absolutely. And yeah, I think they do expect us to be aware of that 100%.
So
in fact, oh, go ahead. Well, Doug, let me just say one.
If we were not aware of your teaching, then all of our prayer up until now would have been not really consequential, or?
No, I would never say that. I would never say that because, first of all, it depends on what prayer book you use. But in prayer books, there are multiple references to the sacrifices, and also some of the prayer books include the traditional prayers. Like in certain sections, we even go through. This is what this is what they would say on a daily basis. And on Shabbat, there's a section about that. In the Shabbat Amidah, we mentioned the sacrifices. In the Amidah for the daily service, we also mentioned that. But no, it's an interesting question you're raising. What's coming up today is really this intentionality. I think they did want us to be aware of that, but from a traditional perspective, to fulfill the mitzvah, to fulfill the commandment of daily prayer, you don't need that awareness on a daily basis from a traditional perspective. You just need to say the prayers. Okay, 1 more, and then we'll shift a little bit.
Okay, Stephen hasn't had a chance to speak yet, so go ahead, Stephen.
So, thank you. Sorry about the picture. It's just I was actually in this prayer every day in Leviticus chapter 6. Personally, I love this passage, so I've been praying it every day. Why? because to me, Leviticus chapter 6 and the previous chapters talk about sacrifice. I know the different kinds of sacrifice in Leviticus chapter 6 are different. There's many different sacrifices there, or I'm not saying the correct word, right, for sacrifice, but then so the reason I do is because it talks about the fire of our altar will never go out, so we should always keep burning in our passion for God. I would contend with the idea that Abraham and these sacrifices came because of, God wanted him to venture into what his forefathers were doing as far as doing sacrifices to please their gods. I believe God reached out to Abraham not to make him prove that he was doing a sacrifice out of, that he loved God more than he loved his previous family's gods, but that God himself wanted to show the sacrifice of love and the cost of love.
So Stephen, you're bringing in that, you're suggesting that, I mean, it sounds like based on your own experience and your understanding of Abraham, that you're bringing into the mix here also some level of intentionality, that there's like, how can we bring, if one feels a connection to God and one feels a love of God, how can one bring that into his or her daily or their daily prayer regimen or spontaneous prayers? It sounds like that's what's resonating for you, is amidst all of this, where's the love? And you're thinking about Abraham and his relationship to God, and you're saying you find Leviticus chapter 6 particularly meaningful, and that idea of, your love of God or your passion for God never running out. And it's a beautiful idea. So thank you for bringing that intentionality into the mix. So I'm aware of the time, so I want to shift gears, and then those who need to head out can head out, and then I can stay on and answer some additional questions. So on the heels of the rabbis connecting the daily prayers with the ancient sacrifices, and not only the ancient daily sacrifices, but the thematic sacrifices. Some of our prayers every day reflect those kinds of themes. Like every single day in the Amidah, we say, "Forgive us, we have sinned, pardon us," and we acknowledge God for being gracious and very willing to forgive. And one of my favorite prayers is this prayer of gratitude, where we specifically thank God and acknowledge all the things that are with us every day, the things that we can consider miracles, and we acknowledge goodness in the universe and compassion and kindness and hope. It's just a section of the Amidah that's chock full of I think, a lot of positivity. And it ends with a final blessing, acknowledging that it is appropriate to give God thanks. So, I always feel like there's so much more that we could do. And, we could have a whole semester on sacrifices. But I hope this gives you some sense of the range of sacrifices in the Hebrew Bible, not only daily fixed sacrifices, but where we are now in the annual cycle, focusing on all these different kinds of sacrifices. And, if this is something you're interested, there are a few resources, and that I hope you'll write down if I'll mention them. The Jewish Study Bible and Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible are both great resources to help us appreciate the sacrifices in ancient Israel, and something that can feel foreign to us. Both those Bibles really, I think, help us wrap our head around that. But also, I think it is important to keep in mind, as Maya set the stage for us at the beginning, that sometimes it does seem like the sacrifices are so foreign, but the rabbis really said, no, they're not. We are incorporating the model of sacrifices of getting close to God, as Tanya started us off with. This idea is becoming part of our daily prayers, and we're going to do it every single day. And then they even incorporated elements of the occasional sacrifices into the daily prayers, which is so interesting. So the idea of forgiveness and the idea of gratitude and all the psalms that we say traditionally every day in the morning service and in the afternoon service, all those are about praising God and getting close to God in a way that I think the sacrifice is probably intended.